What is directory traversal? Now, directory traversal is an HTTP exploit which takes advantage of security misconfiguration on web servers in order to gain access to data inside their root directory. Successful directory traversals allow attackers to view restricted files or even execute commands against targeted servers. Directory traversal attacks typically exploit web browsers and all servers accepting unvalidated input data from them. All servers accepting input without validation become vulnerable. Threat actors typically launch such an attack by scanning through directory trees in search of restricted files on web servers. Directory traversal attacks manipulate variables that reference file paths within web applications. The attacker modifies the path variables to move upwards in the directory structure or to traverse to different directories. This is typically done using sequences like .. or .. in Unix and Windows systems respectively. Hence, this attack is also known as backtracking or .. attack. Now let's talk about the path separator symbols which can be used for separating file paths. Path separator. The path separator is the symbol that separates directories and files in a file path. Each operating system uses a different path separator. Under Unix Linux, the root directory is represented as a / and its directory separator is also represented as /. On Windows computers, however, its representation resembles drive letter .. where the drive letter is the letter of its drive and a / serves as the directory separator. Some examples of system files that can be accessed by an attacker are: on Unix-based systems, these include the etc password file, which contains information about user accounts, the etc group file, which lists the groups to which users belong, the etc profile file, which contains default user variables, the proc self environment file, which contains certain environment variables, the etc/issue file, which contains a message displayed before login, the proc/version file, which contains the Linux kernel version in use, and the /proc/cpu info file, which contains processor information. On operating Windows system, the attacker can access these files. Why does directory traversal vulnerability occur? One common cause of path traversal vulnerabilities is insecure input validation. This occurs when a web application fails to properly validate user input, allowing an attacker to inject malicious input that can be used to exploit the vulnerability. An attacker could, for instance, employ a specially crafted input string to access sensitive files or directories on the server. Another common cause of path traversal vulnerabilities is poorly configured web servers. In some cases, a web server may be configured to grant access to sensitive directories that should be restricted. This can occur if the server administrator fails to properly set up file permissions or directory access controls. Finally, insecure file permissions can also contribute to file traversal vulnerabilities. If a web server allows users to read or write files with limited permissions, an attacker could exploit this vulnerability to gain access to sensitive files or directories. Example of a vulnerable PHP code. In this code, this file is to be included. It's taken from the $_get parameter file without any input validation or sanitization. This allows an attacker to manipulate the $_get parameter and access any file on the server. For instance, consider this URL. This URL has an inclusion function as a get method request. An attacker can use a directory traversal attack to append / directly to the URL path, such as an attacker would then gain access to the etc password file containing confidential user and password data. Methods to bypass directory traversal attack defense. Here's an example of a vulnerable JavaScript code that can be exploited in a directory traversal attack. In this code, the file name variable is taken from the user's input without any validation or sanitization. An attacker could take advantage of this vulnerability by sending requests with file name parameters containing sequences like .. which enables accessing files outside the web root directory, potentially including sensitive ones that reside therein. An attacker could send a request with this URL in order to trigger the read file function and access the contents of etc/password file. Methods to bypass directory traversal attack defense. Following are some of the methods which can be used to bypass directory traversal attack defense. First one is using URL encoding. If it finds any .. and / in the input, it either rejects it or sanitizes it. Either way, our mission fails. To bypass the lazy filter, we encode or double encode all the dots and slashes in our input by using some standard URL encodings. These filters usually accept these encoded inputs and our work is done. As we can see in the example, an attacker can encode .. using different encoding patterns which can help to bypass filters. A cheat sheet for the encodings that can be used. Second is using nested travel sequences. We can come across some applications that use a filter that sanitizes the input by removing traversal sequences, but they do not apply this filter recursively. And these filters can be fooled easily by using nested traversal sequences. For instance, we can use one of the following nested traversal sequences. We can check which nested sequence can bypass the filter using the hit and trial method. Third one being using file extension with null byte. The type of filters that we have seen above look for the path traversal sequences in the input. However, some applications chose to ditch this mechanism and instead look for certain extensions like .png, .jpeg. In the file name parameter, to verify the input and strip everything else, that is extra. Fourth one is including the base folder. Some applications verify if the user supplied file name begins with a particular subdirectory or base folder. By adding the base folder of the requested file to our crafted path, we can bypass such filters. How to prevent directory traversal vulnerability? Now, first one is sanitizing the user input. It's crucial. Sanitizing user input is crucial. It involves filtering out or escaping characters that could be used to perform directory traversal attacks. Specifically, you should look for characters like .. and prevent them from being used maliciously. Input validation and sanitization should be applied not only to the user provided file paths, but also to any input that affects file or directory operations. Second one is using a whitelist. Implement a whitelist approach to file access. This means maintaining a list of approved files or directories that the application is allowed to access. Deny access to any files or directories not explicitly listed in the whitelist. This approach is effective in restricting access to only known safe resources. Third one is using a sandbox. To restrict access to the file system, leverage operating system features like permissions and access control lists, these ACLs. Set appropriate permissions to limit what files or directories the application can access. Ensure that the web server and application are configured to run with the least privilege necessary to perform their functions, minimizing potential attack surfaces. Fourth one is using security features. Enable security features within your application, web server, and database. This includes implementing SSL TLS encryption to secure data in transit, authentication mechanisms to ensure only authorized users can access sensitive data. Additionally, use security headers like content security policy to mitigate web-based attacks. Fifth one is keeping the software up to date. Regularly update your operating system, web servers, application servers, and database software with the latest security patches. This is crucial for addressing known vulnerabilities that attackers can exploit. Establish a patch management process to ensure timely updates and security fixes.